Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to 1% Better, where we take a look at hidden stories in sports. Your medical question today for Dr. David Lipman, my co host, and I'm Xylon Fnaik, by the way. Totally, they've got this wrong, but anyway, we do it on the fly and on our toes. Your medical question is: what tissue in the human body has no direct blood supply at all?
You sure this isn't the same? Like, this sounds really familiar, mate. It sounds like you're just asking the same sort of questions over and over again. Like, it sounds familiar to last week with the cornea, but I can't remember, mate.
I
So
love
I
how you're
assume it's
buying
like, I'm
yourself
just gonna
some
say the
time,
cornea.
buying some time to think if something clicks. According to my answer, it is the cartilage. Apparently, it receives nutrients through diffusion from surrounding tissues.
That is true. That is indeed true. Yeah, it's good. It's a good answer. It's a good question.
Don't you? Last week, you talking about last week's question. Last week, I copied the question from previous guest host, Dan Squires. This week, I worked hard to get my own real question simply because Dan reprimanded me. He heard that on last week's episode and he sent us this voice message.
Just out for a jog here. Beautiful sunny afternoon. Just wanted to say thanks for the shout out. Keep up the good work, you and Xylon. And yeah, hopefully he can find his own questions for the medical question in the future. 74-20 through the first half, by the way. And then 75-14 for the second half. So that was the splits. Cheers, mate. Have a good weekend. Cheers.
Yeah, he definitely wrapped you across the knuckles there, mate, which I enjoyed.
I can't even get angry because he did it in the nicest possible way. Such a good tone and everything. Anyway, Dan, thanks for nothing. I've got my own questions now. Selfish bugger. If you're listening to this podcast for the very first time, loyal listeners will know that we've got an amazing partner in Precision Fuel and Hydration supporting us. Only the best will do when it comes to your race nutrition. One of the athletes, Gila Geens, did finish second in Ironman 70.3 Geelong in Australia, behind Christian Blumenfeld and in front of Hayden Wild. We'll talk a little bit about what a race that was, but yeah, fueled by Precision Fuel and Hydration, a podium run there by the world champion.
Yeah. Yeah, so he hit 98 grams an hour. I saw this, they broke this down on the thing, and I did some numbers off it. So he hit 90 grams an hour with 119 grams an hour on the bike, which is pretty common in triathlon. Generally, people will like fuel harder on the bike, partially for logistics reasons. It's easier to physically take stuff on the bike. You also then have less of a GI upset issue. Um, and then, interestingly, if you look at it, right, if you do the numbers and break it down, the bike was 1 hour 57 and the run was 68 minutes. So and his total time for the triathlon was 3 hours 31 minutes. Now, if you break this down, you can't take anything on the swim. Some people take some stuff sort of on the start line pre-swim, and you could say, there's that pre or during, and like, let's not split hairs. It doesn't really matter that much, but let's assume you took nothing there. So if you do those numbers, then that ends up with 105 grams total on the run, which is about 92 grams an hour on the run there. So that's a much more moderate, much easier thing to do there. He was probably taking PF90s or something like that. Well, probably not. He probably took one PF90 and then something else. Or maybe he took some 30s, who knows. But point being here, much more moderate on the run than the bike, which is pretty normal there. But if you do want to be like Yella and use Precision products, we do have a discount code. It is BETTER2026, and that's all in capital letters there. Alternatively, you can follow links in our show notes. We have a link to their fuel and hydration planner that allows you to plan out your nutrition, or you can book a call there to talk to their team to get advice on your fuel and hydration with no obligations to buy. So that is for 15% off your first order with Precision. So thank you to them for their support of the podcast.
I need an update on how you're doing. I actually listened back to last week's episode because I went and listened to your interview with Jimmy Whelan, which has done phenomenally, by the way. One of our most listened to episodes so far, probably on the way to our most listened to episode. But I actually missed it while we were recording, where you were talking about your Achilles and saying, oh, you might never be able to run at the level that you've run ever again. That was quite a big statement.
Yeah, well, it's super temperamental. Like, I literally, everything was fine. And then I've been doing calf raises off a block that's about this high, and I used 2 blocks, not 1 block, by mistake. I just absentmindedly put a second one down. and did 2 or 3 calf raises and realized, and it was sore. So like that is very temperamental, and it's a combination of the Achilles itself and then a bursa that sits underneath it called the retrocalcaneal bursa. So there's a bit of a bursitis and a Haglund's deformity, which is a bony deformity at the back of that heel as well, which can aggravate things. So you see, like tons of runners have had surgery for this Haglund's deformity. Like it's not uncommon at all. When Jorgensen had it and a few others, I can't remember who else, but it's not uncommon. The point being here is like I don't really want that surgery. I'd rather not get it, but that probably also means like if you don't get that surgery, then hey, you may not be able to do the things you want to do as you want to do them, right? So the Achilles is pretty happy at the moment, running 50 kilometers a week, all at 5-minute Ks, maybe 450, right? So like 8 minutes a mile, or maybe a bit quicker than that. But like as soon as I go to 430 or less, it gets grumpy. So maybe maybe that's it, right? Like sometimes at some point in your life, sadly, you're not going to be able to do the things you were previously. Be that you can't run as fast, or you can't run as far, or all of the above. So like you have to come to terms with that, unfortunately. I don't know if that's the case, but I'm open to that possibility and hoping I can get past it. Ironically, today I actually had a really good run, and it was one of the, overarchingly my motivation and how I'm feeling about running is getting better. I am hating less runs. Today I wanted to continue my run even further. Those sort of things are good signs. Now, of course, there are some runs I don't like or whatever, but I'm generally feeling better about it. So let's see, mate. Like I'm open to both things. I'm open to maybe I'm back racing. I'm open to maybe I can't run fast again. And, so be it. Maybe I have to do my conditioning on something else. So, but more importantly, mate, how are you doing?
No, I have a follow up question quickly before we get to me. Why would you not get the surgery? You said very matter of factly you don't want that.
Mm-hmm. Well, whenever you get surgery, you need to weigh up the pros and cons, or whenever you do anything, you have to weigh up the pros and cons, right? Positives, negatives, potential outcomes, costs of doing it, costs of not doing it, right? So when you're thinking about this, it's like, okay, so there's risks associated with the surgery, right? It may not work, you may get infection. There's always a chance in any surgery that you die. And that sounds ridiculous, and it's very rare, but it's not a zero risk, right? So there's all those things, complications, etc. That's the cost, the downsides. The upside is, okay, they take this bone off, it shaves some bone off. Now you have whatever you have, and then you still may not be able to get back to it. And it's a lot of rehab afterwards and all those things. So is that something you want to do? And I don't know if my life is in a position where I can get that surgery at the moment. I don't know if I want to get the surgery. I don't know if it's so. Yeah, maybe it doesn't change my quality of life. I don't know. So you always should be thinking about like the pros and cons of it and all those things. Now, it might get to a stage in a little while where I'm running pretty well, enjoying it a bit. It's not tolerating load, and I want to go see somebody about it and say like, hey, what are my options? What do you think are the chances? Like, because that's all my assumption, or rather, that is general knowledge with some specific knowledge. I don't understand the specifics of the surgery. Like I don't know how big it is. I don't know what recovery times are. I don't know any of that stuff, and I haven't done that research. That would be something where I would go speak to a professional rather than spending some time on Google. I would probably do a little bit of that beforehand, but it's not. I'm not going to base my decision off that. I'd rather go speak to somebody who's going to do the surgery and get their. If it's something I'm really considering, then I would get their answers on it. So, or their thoughts on it, and go from there. But like I'm rehabbing pretty hard. Like I do rehab on this thing 3 times a week. I'm modifying load. I'm very careful with everything. So it's not that I'm, in a similar way with your back, mate. Like we spent a year of you doing a lot of work before you did anything on it, right? And it sounds like we're now an anti-surgery podcast. Certainly not, but certainly I think you need to be doing all the things and or considering surgery. Sorry, rather, you need to be doing all the things and considering surgery. It's not doing the rehab or considering surgery.
For you personally, I was actually going to ask you, as an athlete and as a medical doctor, is that a hindrance almost having too much knowledge? But there you just said, in this certain instance, you don't have all the information. So is it almost like you have enough information to, I don't know, give you not have clarity, but you don't have all the information yet? What is it like being the athlete, but also having some level of medical knowledge?
Is what they call the burden of knowledge. When you know the things, it's actually there's a real burden to it. People think that it's good, and on some level it is. And where it's really helpful for me is helping other people navigate the system. Like I can say to you, make sure you ask these 5 questions. and you then ask that of the surgeon, and that's information you might otherwise not ask or not get, that I think will modify things, right? So when friends are going through something, I'll get people asking questions of me, or they'll say things, and I'll be like, hey, these are the things you need to consider, or these are the things to know about. Ask about this option. Make sure you ask about that recovery time. Make sure you let the surgeon know that this is a priority for you, right? So I can help them navigate that. But in terms of me, it's often not a good thing. Like I mean, the real story here, and we're getting in depth here, and apologies to listeners if they're not that interested. But part of the reason I am who I am is I kind of got sick of having to ask other people for help and getting answers I wasn't real happy with. And so went and decided I just wouldn't need to ask, and went and sort of found the answers for myself, right? And that was going to do more qualifications and degrees and whatever else. The problem I face now is that oftentimes I will eventually get fed up with my own ability to deal with something, go ask for help, and then get advice that is well below what I've already done. That sounds arrogant, but what I'm talking about here is like I had a case of golfer's elbow, right? Pretty annoying case of golfer's elbow. I'd done a ton of rehab on it. I'd done all sorts of stuff. I went to see a physio who, admittedly wasn't particularly good at the time, but it was who I got referred to from my healthcare fund or whatever. Turned up, and like he was admittedly also fresh out of nappies. He'd just come out of diapers, and he like didn't listen to me, did an assessment, and then gave me the rehab I was doing. And I was like, mate, I walked in here, told you the problem, told you what I've been doing. You then spent 35 minutes not really asking questions, did a bunch of assessment, told me to do the same stuff I was doing. I came here for the next step, not that step. So, that can be really hard and really disheartening, because it's hard for me to ask for help as a start point, and then you go in and you get that advice, and it's really disheartening. So that's why I no longer go via my health fund, and I see people who are private. And I've cottoned on to Aiden. Shout out to the Irish physio. Aiden's been really helpful for my Achilles, right, and really doing stuff that I would not have. Assessing me in a different way, and giving me rehab that I would otherwise not have been doing. So I'm appreciative to him.
Oh, that's good to hear, man. Thanks for that update. I think we are in the throngs of endurance sport, the ups and downs of it, and everything we face. I am 10 weeks as of recording now, post L5S1 spinal fusion surgery. Last week, I think I was moaning on you about being bored with the walking. I'm not sure if my physio listens to this podcast, but she progressed me to the pool. So I've started swimming a bit, not too much, just walking in the water and then swimming about 100 meters a couple of times last week now, just to see how it felt. And then also shout out to John Burchett Sharp, who said to me, keep walking, mate, keep doing the walking, take some podcasts. Here's some podcasts to listen to, which I appreciate that engagement from our listeners. But I have progressed to the gym, to the pool, on the watt bike a little bit for 10 minutes at a time. Last week didn't feel so good. Today felt great. Like I was pushing 120 watts, whereas last week I was pushing 60 and 80 watts, 60 to 80 watts, and sitting did not feel so comfortable. So today was like a total change. And I don't know if it's because I did my strength work first, all body strength work, so core activation, glutes, quads. So that would have probably be a reason why I felt better on the watt bike. So progressing. So things are, we're getting somewhere, which is great.
I think that is a good way to do it. I would definitely advise that is the way to do it, is do the strength stuff first for everybody, not just for you. I would say that if you're doing some strength and then some endurance, you do it that way. Maybe not if you're only pushing 110 watts. If it's not particularly hard aerobically, then maybe you can use it as a warm-up, but I would suggest it's still probably better for you in your case, and for most people probably do it at the end. The other thing is, mate, like you must feel like you're back, because you're basically doing 10 minutes worth of FTP work and swimming more than you were swimming when you were a triathlete. So like you're back, mate.
Oh, very good. Very good. I think you've been planning that all week. Very good. By the way, we're talking to Stryd, and we have some cool things planned with
Planning
them.
that all week. I didn't even, mate, I did not know that.
I know.
I
I
did not
know.
know that was coming, mate. I didn't plan that. That's just talent. You can't coach that, mate.
You're born with it. We are supported by Stryd running power meters. And speaking of Hayden Wilde, the triathlete that finished third in Geelong, 70.3 last week, did you notice that he was running in with Stryd pods?
Yeah, he's only running with one, which was interesting. Like, I don't know why he hasn't got a second one. Maybe he doesn't care as much. I don't know. But I would advise him to get a second one. I'm sure if he reached out to them, they might even send him one, given who he is. I was interested by this. Like, I'd love to know how he uses it. I'd be very interested to get an idea of how he uses it. There is a chance that you could link it and get going and use it for distance, so you wouldn't have to worry about using your GPS connection for that. But ironically, as we talked about last week with him, he's using an Apple Watch, and I noticed he was still using an Apple Watch. So I don't know if he's like signaling to potential sponsors or if he has to deal with Apple or something else like this. But he is certainly using an Apple Watch. So yeah, that was very interesting there. But we do thank Stryd for their support of the podcast, and yeah, we really appreciate them and their involvement.
Yeah, the commentators were very definitely alluding to the fact that he was wearing an Apple Watch. They find it fascinating as well, which is cool to see. But let's get through some community shoutouts. Let's have a look at what you've been up to in the
I
last
did
little
not hear
while.
that.
Angelos Ikirioku ran the XM LIM half marathon in 1:47. Second fastest half marathon on Strava, which means it was anywhere from a 10K PB to a slow marathon. Also, Tobias Schmidt won the Hoogevinde Trail Half Marathon. I hope that's how you say it, with a 5-minute course PB in 1:41. And we know Tobias is a loyal listener to this pod, so shout out to him. And then Alex Harris, he won the Reading, ran the Reading Half Marathon in 1:21. Maybe he did win. I don't know.
Yeah, and then Stephanie Brugink ran the All Out Spring Fever half marathon in 1:52. Steve Bullock, another loyal listener, ran the Stansted half marathon in 1:49. And then Marco Altini, previous guest and listener to the pod, did the Chianti by UTMB 46K. So he ran 4:33 there and ninth in his age group. He's just dropped a big breakdown of how he was finally able to overcome his cramping issues and that sort of stuff and prepare for this. I haven't read this yet. It's bookmarked in my inbox to read it. It only came out on Tuesday. But yeah, big breakdown of everything there. And Marco's doing a bunch of coaching. So I'd encourage people to go have a listen to that, go have a read of that if you're interested. I know Marco was doing a bunch of gym work in prep for this and then converted back across to some more running. So I'm super interested there. He's obviously got the Pastoria 100, his life's work, the Pastoria 100 coming up. So yeah, excited to see Marco on that.
And then good luck to Jimmy Whelan and Victor Smangs at the Berlin Half Marathon this weekend. And speaking about Jimmy, he was on last week's episode and it is absolutely blowing up, like we say. Thanks so much to everyone who engaged on it. Dan Squire said, great work on the medical questions island. And you called it David with respect to his marathon efforts. You heard his voice note there earlier. We've had great feedback on the Whelan episode as well. More of it from Matt, who said, great chat, boys. Lewis said, great interview with the Stryd god Jimmy. Can't wait to see how he goes in Berlin. Nick Court said, what an effing honest and down-to-earth guy Jimmy is. You, sir, have gained a fan that is inspired by you. Keep it up. Some more that have come through, David?
Yeah, so Boris Cortez was talking a bit about our listener question last week where we talked about time zone changes. And he said, I'm a bit biased, but Plasmade works phenomenally for time zone changing. They have a protocol published on that. I used it when I did the Norseman traveling from Dallas to Oslo, sleeping like home on the second day of travel with respect to our chat about the. Oh, yeah, so we talked about that already. We also got a text from Brad Huff, a former colleague of ours who loved the Jimmy episode. He actually suggested a couple of future guests, so I need to do some research on them. So thanks to Brad for both listening and sending that stuff in. And then we also had some interesting responses. So every week we put a Spotify poll in. So those who listen on Spotify, there's always a poll. Every week we put it there. And, you know, people variably respond to this. And I'm not sure if they just respond to the ones they're interested in, but there's certainly some interesting stuff here. When we asked a poll a couple of weeks ago, when we talked about the mess at the USA Half Marathon Championships, we talked about the USA potentially sending 6 women instead of 3 to the World Row Running Champs. And basically everyone said it's not fair to send 6 to the rest of the world, which was pretty like, maybe they were all non-Americans who said that. Maybe the Americans agreed. I don't know. I don't know who answers these polls, but that was interesting feedback from the listeners. And then similarly, everybody agreed the worst coaching job in the world was the English football/soccer coaching job. Everyone agreed, 100%. Yep, that is the worst one. So, I mean, maybe that's a comment on how hard it is. Maybe it's a comment on a hate for British football. I don't know, but yeah, very interesting nonetheless. So, thanks to those who answer those polls. There is one every week for Spotify. We can't put that anywhere else. Our apologies. We can't put it on Apple and we can't put it on YouTube, but or any other platforms you listen on. But do go there if you are on Spotify and do that. And for that matter, if you haven't signed up for the pod, if you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe on whatever platform you listen on. And of course, rating the podcast really helps us. And please do keep those Spotify comments and questions coming in as we're about to get to some listener questions.
Yeah, Jack Stevens commented on Spotify and asked a question. He said, first time dealing with an injury while training for an Ironman 70.3 and a marathon. Main advice for returning to training? I always look at data and feel deflated seeing my heart rate spike while doing what used to be easy runs. You then went back and asked him for more context, and he said, completed a brick session on Saturday morning, then played football on 4G, which is actually more stressful on the muscles. Then done a 32K long run on Sunday. Monday morning, woke up to pain in my left knee, which has stuck with me for 2 weeks. Also had some shooting pains in the calf muscles through the week, but they disappeared. Still slightly sore in the knee, but can finally do easy runs on it. Unfortunately, was silly enough to try a run on it a few days after thinking it was better. Well, Jack, we just spoke about surgery earlier. Just go have surgery, man. Just go have surgery. Jokes. What advice do you have for him, David?
Yeah, I think there's lots in this and lots to dissect out. Firstly, it's worthwhile trying to consider your total context in terms of why are you doing a brick session Saturday morning, then playing football, then doing a long run? Like, you're effectively stacking tons of intensity into what sounds like an 18-hour window. It's a bit of a there's a lot there because that football's effectively sprints or at least intervals in addition to a brick session in the morning. So you're basically doing almost like a double threshold, but with less intensity control, and then doing a long run. It just strikes me as a bit risky in that respect. You might have been better off doing something like acknowledging you're going to be running Saturday afternoon, maybe swimming Saturday morning, do your football game, and then do a long ride on Sunday, maybe with a bit of a small run off the bike, something like that, where you're starting to, if you're going to play the football, build that into your training or consider it in your training. But again, I'm not coaching Jack, and maybe he's got a coach and maybe they've built this in. So I don't want to, speak out of turn here. But talking about the sort of question he asked, really, in terms of dealing with an injury, I think, listen, trying to run on something a couple days afterwards to test it, I don't think is bad. You just have to have the idea, or have to be having a low threshold to kill that idea. Right? So you throw your shoes on, maybe run on a treadmill and just go let's test this out. And if this isn't working, I'm going to go and ride the bike instead. So have a very testing. It's not bad, but persisting and not killing that session, I think, is a bad idea. So that's the second point there. But the third point is, it sounds like Jack's back at it already. Now we can discuss this and say what's our definition of injury? So some people would say anytime you have to modify training, you're injured. And some people would say that you're back in a couple of weeks, it's not the end of the world. It's a niggle or whatever. You get to decide it. I'm just bringing some context here, but there's lots to dissect here. So the first thing, and this is why we didn't talk about this last week, even though we promised you we would, Jack. So apologies here, but we'll get into it now. So firstly, let's talk about the heart rate stuff. So always, whenever you have a funny heart rate, is always think is this really the heart rate's off, or is my strap off? Right, depending on how you're measuring it. Now, if you're using a wrist-based heart rate, I'd encourage you to not. You can use optical, but I would be using it higher up. So closer to the heart is better. And then certainly you can use a chest strap as well. So just make sure that the instrument is working. If you've only missed 2 weeks of training, and even then you've missed 2 weeks of running, not all training, then I'm not convinced this heart rate is real. Or if it is, it's maybe a change in plasma volume. But I'm not convinced it's that meaningful. And I think it's probably more psychological than anything. And I don't want to point at you and say it's in your head, because it's not. But if you're still training, your heart rate shouldn't change much, and you shouldn't lose any fitness in a couple of weeks if you're still doing other stuff. Right now, if you've had completely 2 weeks on the couch, you're going back to it, that's a plasma volume change more than anything else. So that's and that will come back very quickly. So it's important to remember as well, in this context of modifying training or even having time off, fitness doesn't magically disappear, just like it doesn't magically appear either. So one Big Mac doesn't kill a six pack more than a salad makes a six pack, right? So just remember that and we tend to overemphasize days and weeks, and I missed a week or I missed 2 weeks versus and underemphasizing months and years. I happened to bump into Rose Harvey yesterday, who's one of Britain's better marathoners. She ran the Olympics. I was chatting to her about her London build, and we were saying the same thing yesterday. Is I said to her, "How many times have you ever had a perfect marathon build?" And she said, "Oh, 0." Right, so you don't get perfect builds. It never happens. So, yeah. Anyway, but if your heart rate is truly high on an easy run, the question is whether it's really easy. And if it is easy and your feeling is dialed in, then there's lots of things to think about with respect to heart rate. So stress, sleep, hydration, heat, caffeine, all of that can all impact heart rate and make it higher. And if that isn't, I mean, and maybe you shouldn't be slowing down then if they're just artificially high for whatever reason. But depending on phase of the season, those sort of things, you need to think about, well, am I looking for an external load? So this can be easy and the pace can be what it is. I don't have to worry about the internal load. Or is it a phase of the season where I should be worried about internal load, where it's I need to be running to a certain heart rate or lactate and then deload the other aspects of it? So generally, and again, like I'm not Jack's coach and I don't want to speak out of turn, but generally in the early phases of training, we emphasize internal load. And then as we get towards race day, when we have race specific goals, we need to worry about external load. So hitting goal paces and goal powers, right? So that's broadly how we think about it across the season. But it sounds like he was able to cycle when dealing with his knee and the calf. So I would certainly think about doing other forms of cross training when you're dealing with an injury in general. You could also add some sauna to help with some of those, maintaining some of the sort of cardiovascular load, particularly if you can't run fast. This is what I'm doing at the moment, is like adding heat stress because I can't run fast, so the mechanical load is reduced for the internal load. And then 2 weeks is nothing really. It's really just a deload for a little bit, so I wouldn't be too worried. But I think I already saw Jack was back running from Strava, so good on. Like, I'm glad he's back and all that, and hopefully that answer helped Jack a little bit, but certainly helped other people that are listening to the pod in sort of their own dealing with things.
Yeah, I've got a friend who shall remain nameless because he listens to this pod. I don't want to call him out, but he's training for Ironman at the moment, and he was working at the Cape Epic for a week, and he was stressing about not being able to swim and cycle and only run that week for Cape Epic. And I just laughed at him and I was like, man, I remember being in that bubble and worrying about a week derailing anything where there's literally no chance of that happening. But we got another question in related to that by Alistair Courtney. And Alistair, apologies we couldn't get to your question a little sooner. We've been inundated with your listener questions, which has been amazing. But Alistair said, another good episode and enjoying the return of the original couple. In a similar query to Jack, I'm also going through a bit of a running injury period with a stress fracture. I'm on the bike in the meantime though, which is fine. But are there ways I can safely keep tendon stiffness and conditioning up during the time safely?
Yeah, this is a really good question. It's a bit more complex or a bit more nuanced in some ways. So it really depends on where the stress factor is, and we don't have that context. But you can certainly do some tendon work if you're interested. I mean, like, listen, if your stress fracture is basically below the knee, you're going to struggle here. But say if it's higher, say it's the femur or the sacrum, towards the back end of that, maybe not in the first couple of weeks, but as you go along, you can certainly do some bent knee calf isometrics to try and help this. So you'd need to get some dosing protocols from people for this, but you can certainly work on tendon stiffness there. So you'd be basically sitting down, trying to do a calf raise in that respect, and you'd be going against something very heavy that's basically immovable. You'd be surprised how strong your calves are. So you can certainly do that, and that will help with it maintain some Achilles stiffness. Remembering again that maintenance of a quality is always easier than gaining it. So the dose you need to maintain Achilles stiffness is not particularly high compared to what it took to gain it. Also, the quicker it goes, the quicker it will come back. So there's a little bit of that as well. It will retrain. And also, there's going to be tons of reconditioning work that you do for the Achilles in preparation to run anyway, because it's a good way to reintroduce some loading to whatever the stress fracture site is. So you're probably going to start some hopping, some skipping, etc., some pogos, and that stuff will really help, some low-level plyometrics, and you'll probably do that before you start running. So I would do that, and then you can have a return to run protocol. So you've got a long time to maintain it, but I do think it's a cool thing to keep an eye on it. So I don't think your rate limit is going to be tendon stiffness for a long time. It's going to be bone. So I think the stiffness will come back over time. But if you do want to do some work, that's how it's just working around it.
Thanks so much for all your listener questions. You can get them into us on Instagram. We are on IG and 1% Better Pod. DM us there or just follow us in general. You can also get in touch with us under our Strava Club. 1% better, all written out in words. Right, let's have a look at some quick bits now that have been happening in the sporting world. We did discuss a few weeks ago the early finish option in the LA Marathon, where runners were able to finish at 18 miles and have it count as a full marathon and get a medal. Now, just to revisit that conversation very quickly, we have some numbers on how many took that option, how many people took that option. What did the data look like?
I wish I'd actually asked you this before putting the document together to see what, like, or not put the numbers in there and kept them private to myself to ask you what you thought. I don't know what I thought this number would be, but it ended up being 985 people, which was about 4.5% of the field. And I guess that's about right. I don't know where I thought this would land. Maybe more than this. I don't. It's hard to know. What about you, mate? Like, what did you think? Does this feel right to you?
All I know is that I'm annoyed because there are 985 people walking around telling their mates they ran a marathon and have a medal to show for it, and they're very proud of it. That is 100% what is happening, which is so annoying.
Just a question on that, mate. If that's the case, what about their shirts? Should they be allowed to wear their finisher shirts?
Oh, tough one, because I'm in this. I've entered marathons. I'm not even going to pretend. I've entered marathons that I have not done, not started, not completed. And I wear those things to the gym, man, with no further questions asked. So I'm not going to be the first one to throw stones here. I
That's
said,
why I asked the question, mate. So I'm glad you were smart enough to pick up what I was, where I was going to go with the next chess move.
yeah, no, we've been doing this podcast for long enough that I could read your mind. I could read where you're going. Let's move on to the Apple Watch discussion from last week. Like I said, it was fascinating in Geelong 70.3, where the commentator was definitely interested in Hayden Wild wearing an Apple Watch. But anyway, away from that, moving on from that, Garmin has now launched WhatsApp integration. What is this about? Sounds very interesting.
Yeah, I guess I brought this up because I sort of alluded to the fact that a lot of these watches are trying to gain more market share. So you start in one area of the market and then try and expand your market, right? So Garmin's obviously done this. This is a move towards Apple Watch, and Apple Watch is taking a move towards Garmin in some respects, right? So we're all sort of middling in the market. But looking at what it actually allows. So the integration allows you to view recent messages and conversations at a glance, read and reply to messages with an inbuilt keyboard, quickly send emojis and reactions to messages, see more chat history with up to 10 messages shown on the screen, and then see incoming calls with the option to decline. So, I mean, listen, I don't want any part of this. There's always been like some level of, you've always been able to get notifications on your watch. I turned that off day one. I don't want any part of this. But yeah, like Garmin users might find this interesting. There's certainly people on the podcast who, might need this for work. It's nice to be able to check, you might be out running, you get a message, you need to check on it, I don't know, wife's pregnant or whatever else, and you might need to get a message and be able to check it on your wrist. Like, I get it, fine. And if you want it, this is great, and it's helpful in that respect. But I think we need not more distraction, but less distraction in our lives. But I digress. There is positive sides to this as well.
Yeah, agree with you. The circumstances, notwithstanding that you mentioned there, not for me. It's a no from me. Exercise for me is a place to be mindful, a place to escape from the other stresses of work. No, thank you. I don't want any other distractions there as far as is possible. New qualification standards for World Athletics Championships and the Olympic Games. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, basically, previously, and some listeners may know this and may remember us talking about this, but previously there was qualification standards. Then what happened was they set those standards much higher. And the goal of that was, let's try and get 50% of people qualified based on the standards and then 50% based on the world rankings. The goal of that is we want people racing frequently in big races so we get better racing so that you don't just turn up to one race, like Noah Lyles can probably still do this, which is turn up to one race, run fast, and not run again. We want a group of people who are racing frequently and against each other so we have a good product outside of just the championships. So we want people to have to race these different things. Now, there's lots of arguments about whether that's fair and equitable and all those things and how easy it is to score points in different races. I'm not getting into it. But they've now changed this to a 40-60 split. So 40% based on the standards and 60% on points. So we may actually see the standards increase. So it's going to be harder to run the standard now to be selected. Now, this has implications for some countries who say, if you don't run the standard, we're not sending you. Right. So, again, we're not going to get in there. And it's also that it means that the meets also now need to be C category or above. So continental level. So like there's a bunch of meets now that you need to be above 2 score points at, I think, perhaps even to run a qualifier at. So it's quite interesting because there was lots of feedback and impact from coaches and athletes from what I've read on this. And so this is where we landed as a result of that. I think there was going to be a change that was even more than this. So that's quite interesting to see. I don't understand all the intricacies of this and what the argument was for and against, but that's kind of where we've landed. So don't be surprised if you see qualification standards go up. A couple of athletes from certain countries therefore miss out, and a lot more people having to qualify based on points, which means people will be chasing points or whatever. And there's usually like a road to whatever, so like road to whatever the next championships will be, website where you can check rankings for people there. But yeah, it's interesting, but let's see.
Let's move on to cycling. Milan and Remo happened last week. 300 kilometers, the longest classic in the world and the first of 5 monuments in the world of cycling. Men's and women's race. Been wonderful to see the women's race being put together for the first time a couple of years ago, and it's growing from strength to strength. I know for a fact you were watching this on the weekend. How did it go?
Yeah, I watched both, mate. I really liked that they have, and this is going to sound a bit silly maybe, but like, so for those who don't know, basically this is a long flat race where not a lot happens. And then there's 2 big climbs and it finishes, right? So pretty much this is the last race that you can kind of predict how it's going to go. The rest of them are a little bit more chaotic. But what happens is the men's race kind of starts because the men's race is what 300 k's. I don't know how long the women's race is. It's 100 and something k's. But basically, like the women's race kind of happens from, let's call it a quarter of the way through the men's race, uh, and then it finishes, and then the exciting bit of the men's race happens after that. So you kind of have this nice product where you start the day, bit of men's coverage, women's full race, this exciting finish for the men at the end there, or the exciting part of the men's race. Not to say the women's isn't exciting, but that's kind of how the day went. So it's actually quite a nice package as a viewer. You kind of sit down, watch a little bit. Okay. And again, the women's is pretty similar in the start. There's not a lot happening, and then it goes crazy. So you've kind of got this, if you really want, you've kind of got, you can watch a whole day, or you can watch like 2 hours and get pretty much everything, the big stuff that happens, aside from, a couple of whatever's that happened early. So I kind of like that as a product. I don't know how you feel about it. Like, what do you think, mate? Or like, do you want to discuss the women's race in general?
Yeah, I do like that TV product that you just mentioned there. Now, I grew up watching cycling from when I was 12, 13 years old. So I know Milan and Remo to be boring for 5 hours, 49 minutes, very exciting for 27 minutes, like you say, towards the end. So now that women's cycling it's on the up, they're getting prominent, big races, the classics are being added to the agenda. It's fantastic. Everybody wins. The viewers win. It is just so much better. But yeah, there was obviously, we'll talk about it in a while. Major crashes in the women's race that went viral because of the nature of it. But they were like, I don't know if you want to talk about the crashes now. There were crashes in the men's race as well, and I've got big opinions on this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like let's get to the crashes because they're probably the most interesting part of this, right? Because in the men's race, there were a few crashes. Van der Poel couldn't use his hand, so he couldn't cycle properly. I read today that he couldn't really grip his handlebars. Pogacar came down, fractured his frame of his bike, didn't know, and so kept riding on it and descended really hard on it. So that's obviously a huge safety risk because he's pushing his bike to the limits. He also had a lot of bark off and then was back on the pack really quickly and then still won the race, which was crazy. You've got strong opinions about Tom Pidcock's choice of line and how he basically gave the race away. So yeah, mate, let's do men's first so we can talk about the women's in terms of crashes and what happened, I guess.
Yeah, just on the Pidcock one, like I called him at the bottom of the Cipressa to win the race, and he really ballsed up his sprint. I think he would have beaten Tade. Look, Tade is the best rider of that we're going to see in a very, very long time. But Pidcock sort of, if you watch the video very carefully, started his sprint on the right of Tadej Pogacar, was boxed in a little. When he realized he couldn't go past him on the right, he had to slow down, stop pedaling, and go around on the left. And in a sprint like that, the moment you have to stop pedaling inside the last 150 meters, there's no coming back. So he messed that up a bit there. But yeah, on the crashes, the women's crash got a lot of attention and went viral on social media because of the nature of it, because it was on a blind corner. The riders had crashed into a barrier. Then other riders coming around the corner couldn't see them, kept going into them. And coupled with that, there was a big drop off into someone's driveway. So a couple of riders flipped over the barrier down that drop off. So obviously it's very, very dramatic and it made headlines, and there were a lot of derogatory comments towards that. In the men's race, the number one rider in the world champion, crashed in a place where he shouldn't have crashed. He fell That won't make any headlines. That won't get any. There were so many crashes in the men's race. None of it will make headlines. I just think our biases still fuel our opinions and what we put out there. And shout out to the amount of people that have called this out on social media as just the amount of work we still have to do, to bring equality and equity into the sport.
Yeah, I mean, also Tadej caused his own crash, right? And it's like he's
Yeah.
crashed in multiple monuments. Like he's one of the best bike riders we have. So like it's worthwhile just like taking a second and going like they went down a crazy corner and they were going hard and fell over. Tadej crashed in just like a bunch. And he
Yeah.
crashed in a way that I would crash. So yeah, just a bit. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen these comments because I don't consume cycling media. So like, yeah, but I've seen the responses to some of them and like whatever.
But yeah, great to get fully into the silly season of cycling, the classics now, which is absolutely amazing. But should we move on to a crazy story that you and I have been talking about, and then listeners subsequently sent it to us as well? We're on to political podcast, but this is hilarious, where a French naval officer exposed their location on a ship because he basically went for a run on the ship and used Strava so the enemy could see where they were.
Yeah, so this isn't the first time something like this has happened. In 2018, a US military base or some military base locations were exposed because of something similar. Um, Basically, there's a couple of things to think about. So people would say, why don't you just make yourself private on Strava? And this guy obviously didn't do that, which is madness. So that's the first thing is like, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. This guy is, A grade stupid in that respect. But if you are, and this wouldn't happen on a ship, but could happen on a military base, if enough people are running there, even if they're private, it will get highlighted as a hotspot. Because what Strava does is it uses like large data to say these are popular areas you should go run there. So I think we told the story on the podcast of a 100-kilometer runner. She's like an ultra runner from Britain whose house location became a point of interest. Why did it become a point of interest? Because she runs there so often. So it goes, oh, there's nothing else around here, but this point seems to be very popular with runners who run here because there's only one runner here and she runs from that point every day because it's her house. So even though she set that to private and she, blocked out start and end of her runs, her house became a point of interest. So people would come near it and run past it. And even asking them, they wouldn't turn it off. So that can happen at military bases as well. Basically, because of this sort of stuff, Strava isn't a training platform. Strava is a social media platform. If I'm the military, I'm saying you are not allowed on Strava no matter what, no questions asked. If I find you on Strava, I'm like, big problems. Like, I just don't. What are we doing this for? Why is this guy on Strava running on a boat? What are we doing? You're paid to train. You do not need to be on Strava. Get off.
Maybe his partner just needs to know that he's at work. Maybe they trust issues and he said, I'm at work and doesn't get trusted, and that's how he's proving he's at work.
I mean, he's on a boat, so yeah, yeah.
Let's move on. A team of NFL stars and a couple of retired stars were absolutely annihilated by the USA flag football team in a flag football match. What is this? Why is this interesting?
Well, flag football is an Olympic sport, is the first thing. And there's been lots of discourse around America's going to win because they're going to put the NFL stars in. They're going to win because of that, or they're going to do this and all that. Like, it is a different sport. So this was part of the Fanatics thing. There's a lot of betting around this, and we're not going to get into the complexities of this in terms of like the nuances of it because there's some influencers who are part of it and all sorts of stuff. But the reality of the situation is they absolutely got spanked here. They got 82-27 was the final score, like cumulatively. And some of the quarters, some of the divisions were a bit closer. But if you watch some of the footage here, you will see that the NFL guys are trying to evade the flag football players as they would evade someone who's trying to tackle them. And tackle is not the same as ripping a flag off your hip. Similarly, if you watch the flag football players evading the NFL players, they're doing stuff like changing their height. Because what you're trying to do in real football is get missed by a hit. So you need to move your center of mass away from their shoulder, basically. In flag football, you're trying to change the area where the flag is on your hips so that they go to get it and it moves. So you'll see the guys shift their hips in and out. You'll see them drop their height and that sort of stuff. And that's how you evade tackles. So it's not that you don't run at them. You might run at them, but then shift your hips in the last second. So when they go to grab the thing, you can't get it. The point being here is the constraints are very different. So are the body shapes and the requirements. Therefore, it's a different sport. So you need different strategy. So I don't know how much real competition there will be to the US in the Olympics, but there is a chance it's closer than everyone thinks it's going to be because of these. It's a different game to the NFL. Yes, there's still strategy. Yes, there's still tactics, but it's slightly different, and what's required is slightly different. So I remember playing a game of a similar thing of like, they call it OzTag. It's basically like rugby league, but with these tags, and watching guys spin move through contact. And I was like, oh, I can't get the tag. And it's like, yeah, well, that's how you evade people here. You don't step to the side. You go straight at them, but then you shift your hips. It's like, oh, okay. Right. It's just different.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. Can't agree more with you. I played rugby at school. I played touch rugby just for fun as a kid, and it is totally different, the things you are trying to achieve. So I couldn't agree with you more. But let's move on to a link that you sent me the other day. The International Testing Agency has a therapeutic use exemption dashboard, and there's a crazy amount of data on there. Now, what stood out for you?
So ITA is the International Testing Authority. So let's start here with what this is. So the ITA is contracted by organizations to carry out testing on their behalf instead of them doing it to maintain independence. So I might be the Olympic Games and I say to the ITA, we are not testing people. We need testing done. Here is money. You go test them. Now, this works for a couple of reasons. There's an independent body, but also there's scale, right? So if everybody is paying the ITA can do more tests and it's cheaper, right? So it's economies of scale here. So there's lots of reasons that this is the case. There are many organizations that use them. The UCI uses them, the Olympics, World Triathlon, and even On Running. And I think we talked about this last year. Is On Running has paid them to
Yeah.
test their triathlon and running athletes as well, right? Which I think is great from On Running. They are crucially, though, the ITA is not used by World Athletics. It's not used by the ITF or ITIA, which is the International Tennis Federation or the International Tennis Integrity Agency. It's also not used by national anti-doping organizations, right? So USADA, whatever, Chinada, all of them, they have their own testing, right? Now, there is many of them that share joint sample collecting with them. So it might be, if I'm going to go test you and I'm, like let's say I'm South African Anti-Doping Agency and I'm coming to test you, Xylon, and the ITA is doing it, we may coordinate so that we both don't turn up on the same day because that's a waste, right? So I might be like, oh, Xylon's due for a test, and the ITA go, we agree, we'll go do it because we've got them down for this week. And then that's the sort of test. And so I test you at a different time because if we've only got 10 tests to give you across a year, we don't want to test two of those on the same day,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
want to spread those out because the best way to catch you is to spread them out as much as possible. So there is some coordination there. So I wanted to make that all clear as like, what is the ITA? How does it work with them? And all those sort of things. So then looking at the data, and I looked through every single one of these cases, you can look at the dashboard high level. You can also download it as a spreadsheet, and I did that. So I dug through this for a good portion of time yesterday. So super interesting stuff here, but I want to keep it pretty high level because I think, with some specifics that people will be interested in. So at a high level, there were 3,528 applications for TUEs. Now, it's worthwhile noting that those are just applications. Not all of them are accepted. Not all of them were needed, etc. So that's applications. This is also from a time period from 2019 through 2025, right? So I don't know in all of these cases. There's some things I just don't know here, which is you may need to apply every year for certain medications. I assume for something like asthma, you apply once. It's a lifelong condition. You apply once. It is now on your list. That is done. There are some things where you might need to apply every year, though,
Yeah.
right? Or you may need to. It's with sort of you've got a 12 months on that, or you get a certain time frame. And there's no to try and maintain privacy. They didn't mention it was this athlete or it was the same athlete. They just said we had applications. And if you look at them, some of them, especially in small sports, the same thing applied for every year. You're like, okay, it's probably the same person, right? So, but we won't get into that. That's just for some context. But if you do look at the numbers, you'll notice they're going up over year on year, basically. So yes, 2019 there was 329. And then in 2020, there was less. It was 167, but then it's 267, 505, 631, 777, then 852. So
A
it is
lot
going
of
up
asthma
over
going
time.
around. A
So
lot
people
of
are getting more
asthma.
and
It's
more TUEs over time.
contagious. Yeah.
Well, mate, it's not the asthma you got to worry about. We'll get to that in a second. What was actually the most common stuff here? But if you look at the application status, so of the 3,528, 2,361 were approved. 903 were either not needed or withdrawn, right? So you might apply for something to put it on the list, but you may not need it, or you may withdraw it later. 186 was still pending, 75 were denied, and then there was 3 other category, whatever that is. So yeah, again, remembering there's some duplication here. The by far the most 2 common things, you suggested probably asthma, and there's a little bit of asthma, particularly in cycling, but stimulants were by far the most. That was 1,360. So this is mostly ADHD medication. There's tons of that on this. And then glucocorticoids, which are anti-inflammatories. So that's like cortisone. So that's 833 applications for those. Right. So that's quite a bit. So that's between those two, that is 62% of applications. So it's over half. And again, it's worthwhile remembering that some people will have one TUE that has 3 or 4 things on it. So it might be that you get both of those things on it, right? So
Just quickly,
it's not quite 62% of people. It's probably a little bit less than that. Yeah, what about it?
I'm just very interested to see that is top of the list there. Like, what kind of medication are people requesting for it?
Stimulants. So there's like dexamphetamines as a classic one. So they use stimulants to help them focus. It is a very classic, like well trodden path for people. I guess one question is this out of the ordinary? And I don't have the numbers for you to say that there's a disproportionate amount. There's also one classic way, you often see asthmatics swimming because they get advice to start swimming early as a good treatment for them. I'm sure that physical activity is part of good treatment for advice to people with ADHD and or they're self-medicating. Like Philly Bowden put out a reel recently where she was talking about she realized how much she was self-medicating her ADHD because when she couldn't exercise, she started to realize how much the running was helping her. So there's probably a little bit of both here, is that they get it sort of has a propensity for these things. There is a question, though, around is there an advantage to stimulants, right? So would stimulants be helpful? And I certainly had this conversation over dinner last night, and I think there's probably some help for certain sports like fencing, where you need quick reactions and hyper focus. I think stimulants might help. There is certainly cases of stimulant use in the Tour de France historically, although I don't think they're used as much today, and I don't think there'd be a good reason to do that in most cases. Maybe in a time trial it would help a little bit, but again, the problem with stimulants is they increase heart rate and they increase core temperature a little bit. So in endurance sports, they're probably going to be less helpful in that respect. Although I'm happy to be corrected on that. There's probably also a use case in some team sports, but again, I'm not sure there. So yeah, I don't know how likely they are to be misused as stimulants, but they are by far the most. And then in terms of getting onto the sports, so for those, there's going to be some sports that people are more interested in. Cycling had 323 applications, 272 of which were approved, 15 are pending, 5 were denied, and 33 were not needed or withdrawn. Triathlon had 78 applications, 54 approved, 17 withdrawn / not needed, 1 denied, and 6 pending. Trail running had 14 applications, 2 pending, 1 not needed or withdrawn, and 11 approved.
I wonder if cycling is so high just by the nature that every high level team has got a team doctor. So just by the nature that a team doctor is around, you ask them for advice and they can sort this out for you, versus triathlon, trail running, where firstly, they don't have those kind of numbers in terms of participation and athletes that are there. And secondly, doctors readily available to help you.
Yeah, I mean, it's not hard to find a doctor. You can generally get them wherever you need them. So I don't think that's a big part of it. I do think you're right about numbers. So every professional cyclist has to fill out a form about TUEs, right? There's probably some Ironman triathletes that are not in the testing pool, right? Like we might have, I was looking at the Geelong start list. There were 70 male pros, 70. I'm not sure all of them are getting tested. And if you're not getting tested, you don't need to necessarily apply for a TUE. You can be tested and you should apply for a TUE, but I'm not sure if they will, right? So, if I'm a first year pro, I may not know that. Like, so, there's, again, numbers are a big part of this. There are a lot more cyclists than there are others. So there's certainly a component of that. There's also, the reality in which you need a TUE to get certain things like fluids at different times as well. Right, so if you get more than 250 mil injection, you need a TUE for that, if it's not a life-threatening situation. So there are probably some cases where maybe this is to your point that they have a doctor available, so that I will just do this and I'll just put a TUE in for it. Where otherwise, if you didn't have a doctor on hand, he wouldn't do it. So maybe you're
Yeah.
right, actually, is that the doctor is there, so there's a little bit more intervention that's happening otherwise. So yeah, there's probably something there. So that's interesting. But yeah, so again, TUEs are not a bad thing. There is probably some abuse of TUEs, and that's what everyone's worried about. But fundamentally, this is people saying, I need this for a medical situation. I'm using it, and here's my form to say so. Here's the doctor who agrees with that. Now, there are dodgy doctors, there are dodgy physios, there are dodgy coaches, there are dodgy athletes, there are dodgy bankers. You know, not everybody's honest. I agree, but this is fundamentally, a process that isn't dirty, and it shouldn't be that controversial, but it can be. What is interesting though is there's certain things, like masking agents that are being allowed. Right now, this is you might have high blood pressure and you're on a diuretic, and this is classically a masking agent. So it masks you taking something else. So I don't understand the implications for this and what that means for doping, right? Like if it is a masking agent and it's banned for a reason, but you're allowed to take it, then what does that mean for the secondary stuff? Do we look at you more carefully? Do we look at it differently? And I don't have answers to that question. I'd love to. We've previously tried to get someone on here to talk to us about doping. We didn't have success with that, and fair enough. But yeah, I don't have the answer to this question, and I might need to do some work here. But there's also some interesting stuff. We talked about stimulants in fencing already. There's also some beta blockers used in archery. So beta blockers slow down your heartbeat. So they're not really helpful in all sports, but they're certainly helpful in shooting sports because you can shoot between beats, right? And the heartbeat will change your aim a little bit. So again, not suggesting there's nefarious behavior there, but it is interesting that in certain sports that it is allowed, right? I found some really interesting sports on there. So I found tug of war was on there, wushu, which is a type of martial art, was on there, and roller derby. For those who remember the '90s, apparently it's still going and it's still on there. So that was really interesting for me to see. But I did want to highlight certain things I thought people would be interested in. So specific TUEs that were available, and there was multiple for all of these. Also, not for all of them. There were many of these had more than one, but sports that had TUEs for testosterone included boxing, duathlon, freediving, MMA, paracycling, cycling, trail running, gymnastics, triathlon, underwater hockey, swimming, roller derby, mountain bike, and shooting. In that, shooting makes a lot of sense to me in that you can be a bit of an older male and therefore need testosterone. I get it. Some of these you should definitely not have testosterone, in my opinion. Like if you need testosterone, I'm not convinced you should be, doing boxing or MMA. Like, why do you have low testosterone and doing those sports? It's a bit strange to me because like that's the therapeutic use for testosterone. So some of this is I looked at some of these and I was like, I don't know what the medical justification for this is. I don't know how. Like, I understand that there is a medical use for testosterone. And in my understanding of it, I don't know how we're justifying it in these cases of these athletes, but I could be wrong here. There could also be secondary uses that I don't know. Because again, I was not an endocrinologist. I do not know everything there is to know about it, but I was a bit skeptical of some of that. Then similarly, the growth hormone use we saw in canoeing, duathlon, figure skating, wrestling, tons in gymnastics, judo, jiu-jitsu, karate, karting, like go-karting, skateboarding, surfing, cycling, triathlon, water polo, bobsleigh, boxing, and weightlifting. Now, again, there are medical uses for growth hormone. And in sports like skateboarding, which is a children's sport traditionally, or rather, the competitors are very young in lots of these. Same with gymnastics, same with some maybe figure skating and that sort of stuff. Like, I can see growth hormone use in those contexts being medically justifiable. These kids need it to help them grow because they are not growing. They have a growth hormone deficiency, whatever, right? And it's not going to be particularly helpful to the sport, although it does help maybe recover a little bit. When we get to things like, water polo, bobsleigh, boxing, weightlifting, I'm a lot more skeptical of what's going on. So again, there are medical uses for it, but I don't understand how you would justify it in these cases because there's a real performance advantage to be gained potentially for it. And again, I don't want to point the finger and say these people are all cheating, and I don't think they are, but there's a lot of exceptions there. Then similarly, just out of interest, there was a few approvals for THC use, so like marijuana, right, the active component of marijuana, so or cannabis, if you will. So motor racing, golf, lots of use in para sports, and again, that makes sense for some of the conditions that the para athletes are dealing with. Squash and surfing. So that was just another interesting point to pull out there. And then lastly, I saw on social media Sam Laidlow coming out, making a plea to have TUEs made public. He started a petition with his mother for this, and apparently it crashed because everyone was signing it and trying to get pro athletes to sign it and say we should all declare our TUEs. We've talked about this on the podcast before, and the like it is a really good idea until you start to think about second order consequences. So on a face level, on a basics, yep, everyone should declare what they're on. We should all know, right? Fine. Except now I have to know your whole medical history, because it's not like, oh, I'm going to just declare the TUEs that might be my performance enhancer. This is women having to declare that they're getting fertility treatment and trying to have a baby. Now, when you're trying to have a baby, I don't have this experience, but I've certainly spoken to people who are trying to get pregnant. That is stressful enough, and you don't want anyone to know about it because there's so many like lost pregnancies, and it's really emotionally taxing and all that sort of stuff. Ash Gentle's recently come out and talked about how she lost a baby recently, and now she's pregnant and she's taking the season off, and that's great. Can you imagine how hard that is for her? And stress isn't a good way to conceive. So now anybody who's getting any sort of treatment to stimulate egg creation, to have IVF or anything like this, that becomes public knowledge. So everybody knows. Anybody can find that out, including sponsors and that sort of stuff. So that's super hard, right? Because now it's going to implicate sponsorship decisions. Because you can say, "Oh, we're not going to renew her because she's not performing," when actually you have information that she's trying to get pregnant, and you're like, "Well, her contract's up. I don't want to renew her now, and then have to have her off pregnant." So there is a lot of privacy stuff here. There's, for instance, there was some cancer treatments for people that were on this list as well.
Oh,
There's
wow.
quite a bit of breast cancer treatment. It's like, do you want to make public that you're a breast cancer survivor? And again, you might want to make public, and it might not be a big deal, but you have the right to not. Can you imagine if everybody had to declare all of their medications to their employers? Right? Can you imagine if you had to say to your employer, "Oh, just so you know, I'm on these meds for this and that med for this." It's like, that's not okay.
Yeah.
Right? You have the right to privacy in your medical situation. So yes, they're in the public spotlight. Yes, there are differences for an athlete, and you're paid for it. But this is a lot, man. So I'm not like I understand what Sam's trying to do, and again, on a face level, super supportive. But actually, when you dig into it, there's lots of stuff here that is on the list that is not going to be necessarily like fun for people to share, or easy for people to share.
Yeah. If life was black and white, we could just be like, yep, share it. That's the rule from now onwards. But the amount of complexities here, and I'm no medical doctor. I have no experience in the medical field. Maybe it's a place where you put these things into different categories, and some categories have to be made public almost immediately, and then other categories don't. But again, as I say, I have no medical experience. I don't even know if something like that will work. What I do know is I agree with you fully. These things are so complex, and it's not just a case of we're looking for the cheats, so let's make it public so we can find the cheats, versus people. TUEs exist because people actually need medical help, and they need exemptions through getting that medical help, and I would say the majority of people legitimately need it. So yeah, very, very complex. Let's move on to the doctor's office this week. Steph Clutterbuck having to walk out of T1 with an issue around POTS syndrome or POTS syndrome. What is that?
Yeah, so it's called POTS syndrome, and POTS is an acronym. So let's start with how the body works normally, right? So you're lying down, your heart rate's low because your heart is pumping horizontally. It doesn't have to overcome gravity. It's pumping from the same level up to your brain, right? Because the whole goal of predominantly the goal of the heart is to make sure the brain has blood, right? If the brain doesn't have blood, there's a problem. Yes, your muscles, yes, lungs, whatever, yeah, but the brain's the thing, right? So when we go from lying down to standing up, all of a sudden our blood pressure changes significantly, right? It goes from needing to be very low because we're just moving blood horizontally. We have to overcome gravity. So your body responds. It's real smart. There's a bunch of stuff that happens. Sympathetic nervous system activation. We get an increase in heart rate. We probably get a little bit of vasoconstriction. Blood pressure spikes to get blood to the brain. Super helpful. That's how it works normally. Not always the case though. So in POTS, which is an acronym for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, it is described as a chronic autonomic system. So that's the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system disorder characterized by a rapid heart rate increase of over 30 beats per minute within 10 minutes of standing, causing lightheadedness, fatigue, and fainting. Basically, what happens here is you're struggling to regulate, and so your heart rate goes up significantly. So it often affects young women, frequently triggered by infections, pregnancy, or surgery, and is managed via increased salt or fluids, exercise, compression garments, and medication. So generally, given the fact that compression garments can help, there's probably an indication here that some of the peripheral vasoconstriction, so blood vessels constricting to increase blood pressure, isn't happening. Therefore, the heart rate is going up more to increase blood pressure, basically, get lightheaded and stuff. So interestingly, though, like the real interesting part of this is that to diagnose this, they use what they call a tilt table test. So a tilt table is exactly what it sounds like. They strap you to a table and they lie you horizontally, and then they like you're all strapped up to things, and they tilt you upright. So they just flip the table, and then all of a sudden you're standing, and and you've got a lot of the sensors on you, and they can diagnose it from that. So there's not a lot more than I sort of want to talk a little bit about what POTS syndrome is, because they talked about it quite a bit on the commentary, and best wishes to Steph, and yeah.
And then we spoke about the crashes at Milan San Remo, but the most visually sort of disruptive crash was from Deborah Silvestri. Do we know how she's doing? She was lying on the ground there, and thank goodness for the immediately we saw her move, so that was a good sign. But I've been wondering what she was diagnosed with.
Yes, so Deborah Silvestri is the lady that went over the railing, basically, and she went straight down. She probably fell about a story onto her back onto asphalt. So pretty brutal crash. To be honest, I could have been, I don't know if it's better or worse. I don't know. Could have been nasty. She ended up with 5 broken ribs and a small fracture in her clavicle. In her scapula, which is shoulder blade. We've talked about fracture scapulas before. They're pretty much always from trauma, and this is a good example of trauma. It's not a big fracture from what I've read, so I don't think she'll need surgery on it. If there is a big crack, you do need surgery, and that's a real challenging recovery. I think we talked to actually Hayden Wild with this, maybe. But the broken ribs depends on how they go and which ribs they are and what the fractures look like as to how much of a problem that is. But she's up and about, apparently well, and doing pretty well, which is quite surprising because it was a nasty crash. I do want to talk a little bit about this, though. So if you watch the crash again, and please, it's a brutal crash, so feel free to not watch it. But Kazini Miyadoma, Finny, goes down, and she actually gets hit by another bike. So other riders hit her. And then what happens is you see one of the riders stop, get up, and go stop other riders or shoot them away, which I think was great. I think that's, when we think about managing first aid, the first thing is like, let's not put ourselves or other people in danger and like stop the danger that's happening, right? So I think that was great. Then Kim LaCourte actually stops to help, or she was part of the crash, I think, and stopped to help Kazia, which I thought was awesome. And, we're humans first and athletes second. And, Kim sacrificing a race, I think it's so good. I just couldn't be more supportive of this. But if you look at what happened, Kazia's got like basically marks on her face from having obviously hit her head or gone down. And Kim was concerned about her and then starts to take off her helmet. It's like, if you're worried about someone's head or if they've got scratches on their face or anything like that, like don't move their head, don't move their neck, and don't take the helmet off. Get them to lie down and hold the neck still until people get there. Yes, she was already sitting up and that's fine then, but then don't touch her. Just like say, sit still, right? It's basically the thing, or you get behind her and try and support her neck, or just don't touch her. But like there is a risk of further harm doing things like taking off the helmet or whatever. So, if you, it's just, again, I'm pretty happy to see that Kim stopped and helped and that, but it's like, it's how you help that can be a problem. And again, in most parts of the world, there's what they call Good Samaritan laws where you can't be sued for trying to help in something like that. But you also, it's not necessarily about being sued as much as it's about you being able to sleep at night.
Yeah. That was certainly interesting and one of the most talked about points to come out of that race. And then Sifan Hassan, she's pulled out of London Marathon, hasn't she?
Yeah, so she's got a bit of an Achilles problem. Spencer Louderbeck, CMO for the podcast, sent us this after I'd seen it already, and it was like, oh, it's like Sifan's like you, and I'm like, oh, I mean, we've both lived in the Netherlands, we've both finished a London marathon, and we both have a sore Achilles. Like, okay, that's about as close as we get. There's not a lot else that we have in common, but I appreciate his thoughts. But yeah, so best wishes to Sifan recovering. I'm pretty happy that she's pulled out.
Both born in Africa.
I guess she is. I don't know where she's from originally. I can't remember where she was from originally, but could be Africa. But yeah, so I like that she's done this early, and
Sudan, I think.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, it might be the case. I think doing this early is great because a lot of athletes will not do it early, and they get to the press conference and they're sort of, I can't wait to run on Sunday, and they may even start the race or not. Like I understand why, and there's money involved and all that, but also like just don't gaslight us. Like, if you're injured and you're not going to run, like don't run, don't come. Like, it's fine. The race will still be good, right? Like, it is what it is. So yeah, I like that she's done it early. It's nice in that respect.
Yeah, she's definitely a different thinker, and we love the way she thinks, her mindset, how she makes decisions. We absolutely love it. Before we get out of here, David, what are we watching this weekend? Triathlon season seems to be in full swing.
Yep. So Ironman 70.3 Oceanside is on, so I'll be watching that. That'll be an interesting race. They race through a military base with a horrible bit of road that they're not allowed to access until race day. So that's always quite interesting to see what happens through there. Lots of mechanicals. They call it the bottle graveyard. So there's that. And then what about you, mate? In addition to that, there's some cycling on this weekend, right?
Yeah, as I said, cycling silly season is kicking into gear now. Next weekend over Easter, we'll have the big one, Tour of Flanders, Ronde van Vlaanderen. In the meantime, we have some Belgian semi-classics to warm up to that. E3 is happening on Friday, Dwars door Vlaanderen on Sunday. Formula One is also taking place in Japan. Keep an eye on that. But I can't believe we didn't talk about Geelong 70.3 and KB's run there. And so good to see him back. And can I tell you, when I knew he was on form and he was going to do well, he was out on the bike, and the people shooting the Ironman documentary series that they shoot throughout the year hadn't featured him at all this season. And he stopped with him and said, "Oh, I see I'm flying under the radar now. I'm not a favorite anymore. I'm not out there anymore, so I'm one of the dark horses." And I know KB, I know his personality, and I was like, okay, we are on this weekend. We are on. So to see him go run the way he ran down there was incredible.
Yeah, so I, as many listeners would know, I host a podcast with the boys, Christian and Gustav, the Norwegian triathletes. And I asked Christian about that. I said, I saw the video of you on a fighting chance on Hayden's video. And I know him, and I know him to be quite funny, and he plays up for the cameras, and he knows that. And he said that was an act, but he also did know that he was, in my opinion, of what I was getting from the media and the vibe, was that lots of people were saying, yeah, it's between him and Hayden and Yella, and Christian's probably going to come. He won't win. He'll podium, but he won't win. And I said to Christian, like, was that the vibe you got? He's like, yeah, I got a lot of that vibe. And I'd spoken to Gustav a week before, and I said, I'm worried about a motivated Christian, because a motivated Christian is, it's the Terminator. And when he flipped that cap backwards and started taking off, I was like, we're on here. He's going. Oh. And so, he's the first man to ever run 4 67s in a row. And he'll probably go for a fifth. Probably go for a fifth this weekend. So, let's see how he goes.
Awesome. We'll be keeping an eye on Oceanside. Always a very interesting race. David, thanks so much for putting this together. We appreciate everyone listening, sharing the episode. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, do so, as we all strive to become 1% better every single day. We drop a new episode every single Friday. We'll catch you next week then. Thanks for this, mate.
Thank you, mate. Talk soon.